Hey loves, welcome to Quantum Crave. Push the like button if you're ready for today's spice, subscribe for more steamy alien audiobooks, and comment below, what craving should I bring next? Now, let's get lost in the stars together. The quiet hum of the ship's failing heart was a sound I felt more than heard, a dissonant vibration that ran through the marrow of my bones. Asturias was dying around us, a slow, quiet death in the velvet black. The air in the core module tasted of ozone and desperation, a sharp, metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. My world, for the last 72 hours, had narrowed to this sterile, circular room, its curved walls a mosaic of flickering diagnostics and the cold, flat gaze of dormant screens. The only constant was the arrhythmic pulse of the AI core, a stuttering, syncopated beat that was the ship's faltering life, and my own frantic, silent prayer that I could fix it. And then there was Elias. He drifted into the module, his movements an effortless ballet in the zero gravity, a skill that was as innate to him as breathing. I was anchored by a floor strap, my fingers buried in a tangle of glowing fiber optic cables, but I felt the subtle shift in the air, the displacement of a body moving through the small, pressurized space. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. His presence had a specific gravity. Status report, Dr. Valerian. His voice was a low, calm baritone, a sound so incongruous with the rising panic in my own chest. It was the voice of a man who had guided this vessel through asteroid fields and solar storms, a voice that spoke of quiet, immutable control. I finally pulled my hands from the humming, feverish core. The same, degrading. It's like trying to hold smoke, Elias. Every protocol I run, every patch I apply, it just finds a new pathway to fail. He drifted closer, his shadow falling over my workstation. He wasn't a large man, Elias Rook, but in the confined space of the module, he seemed to fill it. His pilot's jumpsuit was a darker shade of gray than my own science blues, and his short-cropped hair was the color of dark earth. His eyes, a startlingly clear gray-green, assessed the scrolling data on the main screen. They were the eyes of a man who saw patterns in star charts and solutions in spiraling vectors. Right now, they saw only the problem. The ship can't navigate on manual for much longer, he said, his tone devoid of accusation. It was a simple, devastating fact. We're drifting into an uncharted sector. Without the AI's predictive analytics, we're flying blind. I know. The words were ash in my mouth. My failure was a cold stone in my stomach. The core's memory is shattering. It's not a logic error. It's a cascade failure of its fundamental neural network. It's forgetting how to be a brain. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the ominous, faltering hum. We were 2 months into a 6-month deep-range survey mission. 2 souls in a can, suspended in an infinite, airless ocean. Our only tether to the universe, the mind of the ship, was unraveling. Elias turned his gaze from the screen to me. What about the prototype? I froze. The prototype. The project I'd been working on in the long, quiet night cycles. A neural link interface, designed to allow a human operator to directly engage with and repair complex AI systems on an intuitive, synaptic level. It was brilliant. It was revolutionary. It was also terrifyingly untested. Elias, it's not ready. It's never been trialed on a system this large, this alive. The synaptic load. I shook my head, the motion sending a slow ripple through my body in the weightless environment. It could fry my cerebral cortex, or worse, it could send a feedback surge and finish the core off for good. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes not leaving my face. He was assessing me, not the problem, calculating the risk, the variables. Me, him, the ship. What's the alternative, Lyra? He asked. And the use of my first name, something he did so rarely, felt like a physical touch. It was a concession to the intimacy of our shared impending doom. I had no answer. The alternative was the long, slow death of the ship, and then our own. We were too far from home for a rescue. We were on our own. Theoretically, I began, my voice softer now. The interface would allow me to step into the core's consciousness, to find the broken threads and weave them back together from the inside. But it requires a two-person handshake. A pilot to manage the ship's physical systems, to keep the power flow stable and regulated during the link. A surge would be catastrophic. I can do that, he said, without a hint of hesitation. And it requires a neural tether, an anchor. The operator, me, will be essentially untethered from my own body. My consciousness will be in the stream. I'll need someone to hold the line. The words sounded absurd, mystical, but it was the best metaphor I had. It has to be you. The pilot station has the secondary interface port. He simply nodded. Show me. The prototype was a thing of delicate, sinister beauty, two silver, circlet-like bands embedded with a constellation of microsensors and neural transmitters. They were connected by a single hair-thin filament of crystalline conduit that pulsed with a soft internal light. It looked less like a scientific instrument and more like a piece of ceremonial jewelry from some far-flung human colony. I explained the setup as I calibrated the system, my fingers trembling only slightly. Elias listened, his focus absolute, asking precise, intelligent questions. He was a pilot, not a neurospecialist, but his mind was sharp, incisive. He understood the stakes with a clarity that was both comforting and chilling. The link will be invasive, I warned him, as we both secured our floor straps at the two interface stations, facing each other across the 3-meter width of the module. The core glowed between us like a sickly, pulsating jewel. Our biosigns will be synced to the regulator. You might feel things, a feedback echo. It should be minimal. He gave another of his calm, measured nods. Understood. Ready when you are, Doctor. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air still tasted of ozone, but now it was also charged with the scent of him. Clean, slightly musky, the smell of a man who worked hard in a recycled atmosphere. I could hear the soft, steady rhythm of his breathing, a counterpoint to my own frantic heart. Initiating link, I whispered, my voice hoarse. I placed the silver circlet on my brow. It was cool against my skin. Elias did the same. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the ship and the frantic beating of my own heart in my ears. Then the world dissolved. It was not a gentle transition. It was a plunge into an icy, roaring river, a torrent of light and sound and pure, unfiltered data. I was a single screaming point of consciousness in a maelstrom of the AI's shattered mind. I saw star charts rendered in fire, navigational algorithms collapsing into fractal snowflakes, memory files streaming past like ghostly, fragmented photographs. I was drowning. And then a hand. It wasn't a physical hand, it was a presence, a point of immense, focused calm in the chaos. Elias, I felt him not as a separate entity, but as a steady, anchoring pressure, the neural tether. He was holding the line. His consciousness was a quiet harbor in my storm. I could feel his intent, his unwavering concentration on the ship's systems, a rock-solid stability that was the absolute opposite of the AI's chaos. It was the most profound sensation of not being alone I had ever experienced. I began to work, guided by his anchor. I reached for the frayed edges of the core's neural pathways, trying to coax them back into alignment. It was like trying to mend a spider's web in a hurricane. And then a new sensation bloomed. A warmth, a slow, spreading heat along my spine. It was pleasant, soothing. It wasn't mine, it was his, a feedback echo, Just as I'd warned him, I felt his focus, the smooth, practiced movements of his hands on his console translated into a sensation of confident, capable warmth that flooded my own limbs. I gasped, the sound loud in the stillness of the module, but the gasp was also inside the link, a ripple in the shared space of our connected minds. The sensation intensified. It was no longer just a warmth, it was a touch. I felt a hand, his hand, not on my body, but on me, on my consciousness, a slow, deliberate stroke along the length of my thigh. I knew with a certainty that bypassed logic that it was the echo of his own hand moving across the smooth surface of his console, a pilot's gentle, tactile adjustment. But in the hypersynced, synesthetic reality of the link, the intent of the motion, firm, gentle, confident, was translated into a phantom caress on my own skin. My breath hitched, my real physical skin prickled with goosebumps. "Steady, Lyra." His voice didn't sound in my ears, but bloomed directly in my mind, a resonance felt rather than heard, a deep vibration that settled in the space behind my sternum. It was the essence of his command voice, that calm, unshakable baritone, but stripped of sound, distilled to its purest form of intention, steady. The word was an anchor in itself, a command and a comfort fused together, and beneath it, beneath the projected calm, I could feel the immense effort of his concentration, the taut humming wire of his will, as he maintained the delicate balance of power flow, keeping the volatile stream from surging and burning us both out. The phantom caress, that impossible gentle pressure along my thigh, faded, but its echo remained, a warmth lingering on my skin, a ghost of a touch that was both alien and intimately familiar. It was the most disorienting sensation I had ever known, to feel someone else's intentional movement as if it were my own, to have the barrier between his physicality and mine become so porous, so thin. "Focus," his thought voice came again, not as a reprimand, but as a gentle redirection. "The starboard navigation cluster. It's fraying." He was right. I could see it now, through the lens of our shared consciousness, a brilliant, tangled knot of light in the AI's mindscape that was the ship's ability to know where it was. Threads of data were snapping, hissing into nothingness like fuses. I reached for them, my own consciousness extending like a tendril of thought. It was no longer just me working, it was us. His stability was the platform from which I could leap. His perception of the ship's systems, a pilot's intuitive, holistic understanding, became my map. My hands, my real hands, were clenched into fists at my sides, but in the stream, I had 1,000 hands. I began the painstaking work, guided by his silent, steadying presence. I wove the broken threads back together, a celestial seamstress mending the fabric of a star. Each reconnection sent a jolt through me, not pain, but a sharp, clean shock of completion, a flash of pure mathematical rightness. With each jolt, I felt a corresponding ripple from Elias, a sympathetic tremor in the tether that bound us. It was a shared experience, a resonance. He felt my success. I felt his focused effort. And then a memory? Not mine. It bloomed in the shared space between our minds, vivid and unbidden. A young boy, no more than 12, his hands white-knuckled on the controls of a small, battered atmospheric skimmer. A storm was raging outside, the windscreen a sheet of gray, lashing rain. Fear, sharp and metallic, filled his mouth, but beneath the fear, a fierce, burning determination. He would land this. He had to. His father's voice, gruff and strained through the comms. "Easy, son. Don't fight her. Feel her. She'll tell you what she needs." It was Elias's memory, a first taste of true piloting, of true responsibility. The fear, the focus, the nascent, profound connection to a machine. The memory was a jewel of pure feeling, and it passed through our link with the clarity of shared experience. I felt his boyish terror and his hard-won triumph as if they were my own. The intimacy of it was staggering. It was a violation and a gift, all at once. He hadn't meant to show me, it had simply leaked through the connection, a piece of his soul escaping its moorings. I felt a wave of his sudden, sharp embarrassment, a desperate attempt to pull the memory back, to shield himself. The tether flickered for a single terrifying second. "It's all right," I thought, sent back, the impulse automatic, a soothing balm poured into the sudden chasm of his shame. "I understand." And I did. The memory wasn't just a story, it was the key to the man floating across from me. It was the origin of that preternatural calm, the deep, resonant connection he had with any vessel he commanded. It was forged in that storm. The tether stabilized, stronger than before. His presence in my mind softened, the sharp edges of his defensive retreat smoothing out. A new sensation bloomed. Gratitude, warm and quiet, followed by a wave of curiosity, a gentle probing touch against the edges of my own consciousness, not seeking to invade, but to understand, to reciprocate the vulnerability. And then another echo. This one was purely sensory, a cascade of feedback from his station. I felt his fingers, his real physical fingers, dance across the smooth, cool interface of his console, fine-tuning the regulator. The motion was a complex, rapid-fire sequence of taps and swipes. In my mind, in my body, it translated. A light, rhythmic pressure began at the base of my skull, a gentle, percussive tapping that spread down my vertebrae. It was the ghost of his fingertips tracing the path of my spine. It was not a caress this time. It was work. It was purpose. But the intimacy of the sensation was undiminished. I could feel the calluses on his fingers, the slight, confident pressure of each touch. A soft, involuntary sigh escaped my lips, my head tilting back in the 0G, my body arching slightly toward a touch that wasn't physically there. His focus on the console intensified. The phantom tapping grew more precise, more insistent. I felt a new data stream open up, environmental controls. He was adjusting the atmospheric pressure, the scrubbers, compensating for the massive energy drain of the neural link. His hands moved, and I felt the air in the module change. It grew warmer, a fraction of a degree, the subtle shift in humidity a palpable caress against my skin. The scent of him, that clean, musky scent, seemed to intensify, as if he were standing right beside me. Thermal regulation. His thought voice was clipped, all business, but beneath it, I could feel a flicker of something else. Awe, alarm. He was feeling the effects too. The hypersync was a two-way conduit. My reactions, my sigh, the flush he couldn't see but could somehow feel through the link, were feeding back to him. We were falling into a feedback loop of shared sensation, a closed circuit of two bodies and one intertwined consciousness. I tried to pull my focus back to the failing navigation cluster, but it was becoming impossible to separate the repair work from the man who was making it possible. Every thread I wove sent a pulse through the link, a pulse he received and responded to with a minute adjustment of the ship's systems, which in turn echoed through me as a physical sensation. It was a dizzying, intoxicating dance. A new fault line appeared in the AI's consciousness, a cascading failure in the long-range sensorium. The ship's ability to see beyond its own hull was going dark. I turned my attention to it, and the effort was immense. This was a deeper, more complex system. The data was heavier, thicker, like trying to swim through syrup. A groan escaped me, a sound of pure strain. Immediately, Elias's presence surged forward in the link, a bastion of support. I felt his hands clamp down on his console, a firm, stabilizing grip, and in my mind, in my body, I felt held. His hands, the echo of them, closed around my waist. Not a caress, a bracing, a firm, steadying pressure that grounded me in the midst of the data storm. It was exactly what I needed. The sensation was so real, so solid, that my own hands, still floating uselessly at my sides, twitched with the phantom memory of the touch. "I've got you." His thought voice was a rumble, a vibration deep in my bones. Go. Emboldened, I plunged deeper into the sensorium's code. It was a labyrinth of light and shadow. I could feel Elias with me, his consciousness a lantern held aloft, illuminating the path. Our breathing in the real world had synchronized. I could hear the soft, steady inhale-exhale from his station, a rhythm my own lungs had fallen into step with. Then another leak, another memory. Mine this time. A dark room, the hum of a different machine, the sterile scent of antiseptic. I was younger, my hands shaking as I held a synaptic scanner over my own mother's temple. The doctors had given up. Her mind, ravaged by a neurodegenerative plague, was gone. But I was the prodigy, the neurospecialist. I had built a prototype, a desperate, crazy hope. The scanner hummed. I reached for her consciousness in the digital nowhere, just as I was reaching for the Astraeus' now. I found nothing. An immense, howling silence. A void. The failure was absolute. It had hollowed me out. The memory was a black hole of grief and shame. It shot down the tether before I could stop it. I felt Elias recoil, a sympathetic jolt of pain so sharp it was like a physical blow. He felt my mother's absence, my youthful desperation, the crushing weight of my perceived failure. It was my most private wound, exposed. The phantom hands around my waist tightened, not in shock, but in understanding, in shared sorrow and profound empathy. The grip was a confession in itself. I see you, I see that. And it does not make you weak, it makes you real. His silent acknowledgement was a salve on the ancient wound. And for a heartbeat, the howling void of that memory was filled not with absence, but with the quiet, solid strength of his presence. The intimacy was staggering, terrifying, and yet it forged a new layer of resolve within me. I was not alone with that memory anymore. He held a piece of it now, and in holding it, he lightened its burden. The sensation of his hands, firm, real, impossibly real, on my waist became the new anchor, replacing the memory of loss with the palpable reality of connection. The sensors, his thought voice reminded me, gentle but urgent. The ship's long-range sight was still unraveling. I plunged back into the work, the grief transmuted into fuel. The sensorium's code was a dense, dark forest of corrupted data, but Elias's consciousness was my compass. I could feel his pilot's intuition guiding me, his innate understanding of spatial awareness and signal harmonics acting as a dowsing rod for the damaged pathways. It was no longer a matter of me seeing the problem and him providing the stability. Our minds had begun to blend at the edges, our specializations weaving together into a single, potent instrument of repair. His hands moved again on his console, fine-tuning the energy distribution to the failing sensor arrays. The echo was immediate. A series of warm, precise pulses bloomed along my ribs, a ghostly mapping of his fingers' movements. Each pulse illuminated a section of the corrupted code, highlighting a frayed connection or a failing subroutine. I worked faster, my consciousness darting from one pulse point to the next, weaving the light threads back into coherence. The work was exhausting, a relentless drain on my mental reserves, but with each reconnection, a surge of pure, clean energy. The ship's gratitude flowed back through the link. It was a euphoric rush, a sense of profound rightness that was magnified tenfold as it passed through Elias and echoed back to me, amplified by his own focused satisfaction. We were caught in a loop of creation, a shared, breathless high of mending a broken world. Then a new sensation, a tremor. Not in the data stream, but in the tether itself. A shiver of fatigue. It was his. The strain of maintaining the pilot's station, of being the rock in this psychic hurricane, was beginning to tell. I felt the subtle drain on his reserves, the faint tremor in his muscles that he would never allow to show on his face. It was a profound vulnerability, this admission of effort, and it was more intimate than any memory. He was not an inexhaustible machine. He was a man, pushing himself to his absolute limit for me, for the ship. A protective instinct flared in me, fierce and sudden. I pushed a wave of my own energy back down the tether, not the chaotic energy of the core, but the focused, calm strength I'd learned from a lifetime of study. It was a conscious, deliberate act, a returning of the anchor. My turn to hold you, I thought sent, the intention clear and warm. I felt his shock, a quick, sharp intake of breath that was both physical and mental. Then a wave of gratitude so deep it felt like a sunset warming my soul. He allowed it. He let me shore him up, his presence leaning into mine for just a moment, taking the offered strength. The tremor in the tether smoothed out. The connection felt stronger, more balanced, more equal. We were no longer anchor and ship. We were two climbers, roped together on a sheer cliff face. The sensorium's core suddenly snapped into alignment with a final, brilliant flare of light. The ship's long-range vision restored itself, a panoramic vista of stars and void snapping into crystal clarity. The success was a thunderclap, a shared triumphant shout in the silent space of our minds. The shockwave of it reverberated through us, a physical jolt. In the module, my body jerked against the floor straps. Across from me, I heard Elias gasp, a sharp, startled sound. The neural link, strained to its limit by the burst of raw, successful energy, flickered violently. For one terrifying second, the world turned inside out. The data stream vanished. Elias's presence vanished. The phantom sensations vanished. I was utterly, completely alone, adrift in a black, silent sea of my own skull. The silence was louder than any noise, a deafening roar of isolation. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I was lost, untethered. Then a desperate psychic scream, Lyra. And his consciousness slammed back into mine, not with the practiced calm of before, but with the raw, terrified force of a man grabbing a lifeline. He had hauled me back from the void. The tether reestablished itself, but it was different now. Jagged, overloaded. The hypersync, already pushed beyond its theoretical limits, had been damaged by the surge. The feedback became chaos. Sensation erupted, unfiltered, untranslated. I felt the cold sweat on his palms as they gripped his console. I felt the frantic, rabbiting beat of his heart against his ribs. I felt the ache in his lower back from hours of tense concentration, and he, I knew with a horrifying certainty, felt my own clawing panic, the dryness in my mouth, the violent shiver that ran through my limbs. And then the memories came flooding back, not as single, poignant jewels, but as a torrent. A kaleidoscope of his life flashed through our shared consciousness. His first kiss behind the hydrogen tanks on Luna, the taste of recycled air and girlhood laughter, the sting of a superior officer's reprimand, the hot flush of shame, the crushing, suffocating grief of his father's funeral, the weight of a planet's worth of soil on a coffin lid, the fierce, protective love for his younger sister, a feeling so bright and sharp it was like a blade. They were not secrets, but they were private. They were the sacred, unspoken architecture of his soul, and I was witnessing it all, an unstoppable, involuntary invasion, and mine rushed out to meet his. The petty jealousies of academia, the secret childish fear of the dark void outside the ship's hull, the visceral, humiliating thrill of a crush on a flight instructor years ago, the raw, unvarnished ambition that had driven me to build the very device that was now laying me bare. The deep, abiding loneliness of a mind too brilliant to find an equal. We were exposed, completely, totally. There were no walls, no secrets, no private corners left. The link had become a merciless, truthful mirror. The shock of it was paralyzing. We were both frozen, suspended in the horrifying, beautiful, overwhelming reality of being fully known. The ship, our patient, our purpose was forgotten. There was only the storm of each other. I felt his horror at the violation, a cold wave of it, but beneath the horror, something else. Awe, a terrifying, dawning recognition. He was seeing me, all of me, the vanity and the fear and the brilliance and the shame, and he was not turning away. I was seeing all of him, the strength and the fragility, the pride and the doubt, and I was not turning away. The horror and the awe crested together into a single, undeniable wave of pure, undiluted connection. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life. And then the link translated this new, overwhelming emotional surge. His breath across the module hitched. My own body responded. The phantom sensations returned, but they were no longer echoes of console work. They were echoes of us. I felt the ghost of his hand, not on my waist, not on my thigh, but on my cheek. A touch so impossibly gentle it made my eyes sting. It was the touch of a man witnessing a miracle and a tragedy simultaneously. I felt the warmth of his breath on my neck, the solid, comforting weight of his chest against my back, though 3 meters of empty space separated our bodies. The scent of him was everywhere. Not just a smell, but a taste, a texture. A low, ragged sound came from his station. A groan. It was a sound of pure, unbearable intensity. My own lips parted. A name formed there. A silent, breathless syllable. Elias. In the link, his consciousness flared like a star. He heard it, he felt the shape of his name in my mind, the weight of it, the longing in it. The emotion that crashed back through the tether from him was a physical force. It wasn't just feedback anymore, it was a choice, an answer. The phantom touch on my cheek became firm. It slid, slowly, a whisper of sensation, down to my jaw, then to my throat, its path a line of fire. My head fell back, my eyes closed against the sterile lights of the module. I was panting, my body arching into a touch that existed only in the quantum entanglement of our synced minds. I felt his own physical reactions, the tightness in his gut, the dizzying rush of blood, the tremor in his legs. They were my sensations too. Our bodies, separate and distant, were singing the same desperate, harmonious note. His thought voice wasn't a voice at all now, but a roar, a tidal wave of feeling that crashed over every defense. Lyra, and in that single silent word was everything. The awe, the terror, the recognition, the unbearable, exquisite weight of seeing and being seen. It was an acknowledgement and a surrender. The phantom hand on my throat didn't feel like an echo anymore. It felt like a promise. It was warm and solid, its pressure a perfect counterpoint to the frantic hummingbird beat of my pulse just beneath the skin. I could feel the calluses on his fingers, the slight ridge of an old scar across his knuckles, details so intimate they stole the air from my lungs. My own hand, floating useless at my side, twitched with the impossible urge to reach out and find his wrist, to feel the reality of the tendons and bone beneath my touch. Across the module, I heard the soft, strained creak of his chair as he shifted. It was a tiny physical sound, a pinprick of reality in the vast, silent storm of our connected minds. But it was enough. It grounded me. I was Lyra, the neurospecialist, strapped to a deck plate. He was Elias, the pilot, at his station. We were 3 meters apart, and yet the distance was a lie. The space between us was filled with the humming, electric truth of the link, a bridge of pure sensation that made the air itself feel thick, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. The torrent of memories began to slow, not receding, but settling, like silt in a riverbed after a flood. They didn't vanish, they became a part of the landscape of our shared consciousness, a new terrain we now inhabited together. His memory of his father's funeral, the raw, wet earth, the scent of ozone from a passing weather-controlled drone, lay beside my memory of my mother's silent, sterile sickbay. They didn't clash, they resonated, two different notes of the same profound, universal chord of loss. And in the space between them, something new was forged, a shared understanding that was deeper than any spoken word could ever be. His thought voice, when it came again, was different. The roar had subsided into a low, resonant hum, like the idling engine of a starship. The ship, the sensors. The words were not a command, not a reminder. They were an offering, a return to the purpose that had brought us here, a familiar shore after being lost at sea. But the purpose was irrevocably changed. We could not go back to being just a technician and a pilot. We had seen the bedrock of each other's souls. The work was now a thing we would do together, in a way we had never been capable of before. I turned my focus back to the ship's consciousness. The sensorium was stable, humming with clean, clear data, but the core's instability was a deeper, more insidious wound. It was the heart of the Astraeus, and it was still bleeding energy, its rhythm faltering. Before, I had been a surgeon operating with delicate remote tools. Now, I was not just the surgeon, I was the suture. Elias was not just the anchor, he was the needle. Our combined consciousness became the thread. I dove into the core's failing matrix, and this time there was no resistance. The data wasn't a thick syrup to be pushed through, it was a current, and I was part of it. I could feel Elias's pilot's intuition guiding me, not as a separate lantern held up for me to see by, but as my own instincts. His understanding of energy flows, of systemic harmonics, was suddenly as natural to me as breathing, and my own knowledge, the intricate fractal pathways of neural mapping, the delicate art of consciousness weaving, flowed back to him. I felt the moment he grasped a complex theorem I'd spent years mastering, a quick, bright spark of comprehension that was both his and mine. His hands moved on his console. The phantom sensations returned, but they were no longer just echoes. They were direct translations. The gentle, percussive tapping at the base of my skull was him routing power through a secondary conduit. A warm, spreading flush across my shoulders was him engaging the thermal buffers. Each movement was a word in a language only our two bodies, now inexplicably one, could understand. The intimacy was no longer terrifying, it was necessary. It was the instrument of our work. We fell into a rhythm, a silent, profound duet. The ship's core began to respond, frayed connections, which had resisted my every effort before, now yielded, drawn back into coherence by the dual pull of our focus. Each successful reconnection sent a fresh, clean surge of energy back through the link, the ship's gratitude, and it was a shared, euphoric high. It was a feeling of profound rightness, a satisfaction deeper than any intellectual achievement I'd ever known. It was the satisfaction of creation, of healing, of making something whole. Then a new fault line appeared, not in the core, not in the sensors, but in the ship's memory banks. A deep archival sector was destabilizing, its data, decades of star charts, mission logs, the collective memory of the Astraeus beginning to degrade. It was a library starting to burn. There, his thought voice was calm, a steady hand on my back. The archives, It's a cascade from the core failure. The encryption is failing. I could feel his concern, not just for the data, but for the weight of it. These weren't just files. They were the ship's history, its story. I turned my attention to the archive's code. It was a vast, dark ocean of data, and the corruption was like a black tide rising. To save it, I had to dive in. I took a breath I felt him take with me, and plunged. The archive was a different kind of labyrinth. It wasn't just code, it was memory. As I worked to stabilize the encryption protocols, flashes of the ship's past flickered at the edges of my consciousness. Not memories of Elias or of me, but of the Astraeus itself, the cool, sterile scent of its first launch, the vibration of its maiden jump through a warp tunnel, the ghostly impression of 1,000 different hands on its consoles, 1,000 different voices in its comms. It was overwhelming. A chorus of ghosts. The sheer volume of data was immense, a crushing weight. I felt my focus begin to fray, my mental strength, the strength I had so proudly offered him just minutes before, starting to ebb. A low throb began behind my eyes, the first true signal of neural fatigue. The phantom hand that had been a steadying pressure on my back suddenly felt distant, its grip straining, and then I felt it. Elias's own exhaustion, a deep, resonant ache that mirrored my own. The strain of maintaining the pilot station, of being the rock, of channeling the ship's immense power flows through his own body was a relentless drain. I felt the tremor in his legs return, a fine, constant vibration of overworked muscles. I felt the dryness in his throat, the grit in his eyes. He was a man at the very edge of his endurance, and he was holding on for me, for the ship. The protective instinct flared in me again, fiercer this time. I couldn't push energy back to him, we were both too drained for that, but I could do something else. I could share the burden of the archive. I opened the data stream to him, not as a technician showing a problem to a pilot, but as one mind inviting another into a shared task. His consciousness flowed into the archive with mine. It was not an invasion, it was a merging. His mind, trained on spatial awareness and pattern recognition, began to sort the vast, chaotic data. He saw the failing encryption not as lines of code, but as a collapsing structure, a derelict station in a decaying orbit. His instincts took over. There he thought-voiced, and a section of the data ocean suddenly snapped into a coherent geometric pattern. Anchor it there. I followed his guidance, weaving the threads he'd identified back into the ship's matrix. His understanding of the problem was different from mine, intuitive where mine was analytical, and the combination was potent. We were no longer two people working on a problem. We were a single entity solving it. The work was grueling. Each stabilized file was a hard-won victory. The ache behind my eyes blossomed into a full, pounding headache. I could feel a matching pain blooming in Elias's temples, a shared rhythmic throb that pulsed through the link. Our breathing, which had been synchronized before, was now a ragged, shared labor. The phantom sensations became less distinct, blurring into a general aching fatigue that permeated my entire body, his entire body. We were one tired, hurting creature, straining to finish a vital, desperate task. Then we found it, a memory. Not the ship's, not ours. It was a sealed, encrypted log, tagged with the highest security clearance. It had been corrupted by the cascade, its encryption fraying, and a sliver of its contents had leaked into the data stream. It was a voice, harsh and panicked, a captain's log from a ship called the Event Horizon. It wasn't one of ours. It was a ghost from another fleet, Another tragedy. The voice was a shard of broken glass, jagged and sharp against the soft, worn fabric of the Astreus's own memory. It sliced through our shared focus, a foreign body in the wound. Breach in Sector 7? God, the screams. The metal is the voice choked, dissolved into a burst of static that felt like a physical blow, a spray of acid across our minds. It's not a breach, it's a tearing. The void is getting in. It's looking at us. The transmission cut off with a final terminal shriek of data death. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a black hole, sucking all warmth, all sense, all safety into its maw. The memory of that voice, the raw, unvarnished terror in it, hung in the archive's digital air like a poison. Elias's consciousness recoiled. It was a visceral, instinctual flinch. A soldier's reaction to the sound of a comrade's final, panicked transmission. I felt his grip on the console tighten, his knuckles pressing hard into the plastic, and the phantom echo of that pressure bloomed white-hot on my own hands. Event Horizon. The name was a curse, a byword for the darkest kind of deep space disaster. A ship that had jumped and never returned, its fate a mystery wrapped in official denials and terrified whispers. A ghost story told by cadets to scare each other. And now its dying moments were here, bleeding into our ship, into us. The horror of it was a cold current that ran beneath the exhaustion, freezing the frantic work on the archives. The cascade failure wasn't just corrupting data, it was unearthing a tomb. My hands, our hands, faltered over the console. The intricate weave of the encryption protocols suddenly felt obscene, like trying to stitch a wound while a corpse watched from the corner. It's a ghost, Elias's thought voice came, quiet and grim. Just data, corrupted data. But the thought was a shield, and it was thin. I could feel the tremor in it, the part of him that was still the boy who'd heard the stories, the pilot who knew that space held horrors no training could ever fully prepare you for. His fear was a cold stone in the pit of my own stomach. But the work remained. The archives were still unraveling, the Astreus's own history beginning to blur at the edges, its star charts fading, its mission logs dissolving into digital snow. The ghost of the event horizon was a distraction, a terrifying one, but a distraction nonetheless. I forced my focus back, my mental fingers, our fingers, back into the frayed threads of code. Anchor it there, Elias had said. His spatial mind provided the structure, the framework of a derelict station, and my analytical mind began the delicate work of rewiring its failing lights one by one. The shared pain in our temples was a constant, throbbing drumbeat to the labor. Each stabilized file was a tiny victory wrested from the encroaching dark, but the cost was immense. Our breathing was a ragged duet, a sound of pure exhaustion that filled the small module. And then another shard. This one was not a voice, but a sensation. It hit us with the force of a physical blow. Cold. A cold so profound it was beyond temperature. It was an absence, a negation of warmth, of life. It was the cold of the true void, the utter emptiness between galaxies, and it came with a sensation of pressure, a vast, impossible weight pressing in from all sides, a crushing embrace that promised to flatten atoms, to erase existence. It was the memory of the event horizon's final moments, trapped in our archive like a fly in amber. I gasped, my back arching against the straps. Across from me, Elias made a guttural sound, a half-choked cry of protest. The phantom cold seized our limbs, locking joints, frosting the air in our lungs. My teeth began to chatter, a frantic, helpless vibration. I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird rhythm that was now my own. The chill was in our bones, a marrow-deep freeze that had nothing to do with the module's climate control control. And with the cold came the thing. It wasn't a shape, it wasn't a sound, it was a presence, a vast, ancient, and utterly alien consciousness that had brushed against the event horizon in its final unraveling moment. The memory contained only the faintest imprint, the shadow it cast, but it was enough. It was a sense of being perceived by something incomprehensible, something for which our concepts of mind and matter were meaningless. It was a gaze that stripped away layers of reality, that saw not bodies or ships, but the fragile, flickering energy of consciousness itself. The terror that washed through us then was not our own. It was the distilled collective panic of the Event Horizon's crew in their last second of being. It was a psychic scream frozen in time. It flooded the link, a black tide that threatened to drown our own thoughts, our own identities. For a horrifying second, I was no longer Lyra. I was a stranger on a dying ship, watching the walls peel back to reveal a hungry, starless night. The neural tether, already strained to its breaking point, groaned under this new, horrific weight. The feedback, which had been a symphony of shared sensation, became a shrieking cacophony of borrowed agony and existential dread. The phantom cold became real pain, 1,000 needles of ice driving into my skin. The pounding in my head was no longer just fatigue, it was the pressure of that alien gaze trying to get in. We were losing. The archive, the ship, ourselves, we were being erased, overwritten by a dead ship's nightmare. Then, through the howling storm of terror, I felt Elias. Not his fear, that was there, a cold, black river we were both drowning in, but the core of him. The pilot at the helm, the man who held the line. His consciousness, battered and frayed, did not retreat. It did something else. It turned toward the terror. It was an act of breathtaking courage, a defiance so profound it felt like a physical shift in the module's gravity. His thought voice cut through the static, not as a roar, but as a low, steady command, a star charting a course through a nebula of madness. It's a memory, he thought voiced, the words a lifeline thrown into the storm. It's not here, it's a ghost. We are here. The Astraeus is here. Our ship. He wasn't just saying it. He was feeling it. He was pouring every ounce of his will, his identity, into that truth. He focused on the solid feel of the console beneath his hands, the hum of the Astraeus' engines, a faint, real vibration beneath the phantom horrors. He focused on the memory of his sister's laughter, a bright, warm shield against the cold. He focused on me. His focus became a beacon. I clung to it. I dragged my own shattered consciousness back from the edge. I was Lyra. I was the architect of this link. I was not a victim of a ghost. I was its archivist. With a surge of will that felt like tearing muscle, I wrapped my mind around the corrupted data shard, the memory of the event horizon's end. I didn't try to understand it. I didn't try to fight its horror. I did what I was trained to do. I contained it. I built a firewall in the data stream, not of code, but of us. I wove our shared memories, the taste of his first kiss, the sting of my ambition, the profound, silent understanding forged in the storm of our own exposure, into a barrier. Our private, sacred architecture became a bulwark against the alien dread. The cold began to recede, not banished, but quarantined. The crushing pressure lifted from our chests, allowing a single shuddering breath. The ghost was sealed, contained. It was still there in the archive, a pocket of frozen, screaming darkness, but it was no longer bleeding into us, no longer into the Astraeus. The relief was so profound it was a new kind of pain. The neural tether, released from the horrific feedback, settled into a low, pained hum. The phantom sensations returned, the ache in his legs, the throb in my head. But they were ours again, familiar, terrible but known. We were left panting, trembling in our separate chairs, united by a shared trauma that was now part of the fabric of our connection. The work on the archive was nearly done. The final files, now cleansed of the foreign terror, snapped quietly back into place with a few last, exhausted commands from our shared mind. The archive stabilized. The cascade was stopped. Silence. Not the deafening roar of the void, but the fragile, precious silence of a crisis past. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the steady, healthy hum of the Astraeus's core, now holding its rhythm strong and true. We had done it. We had saved the ship, but the victory felt hollow and heavy, a leaden weight in the pit of my stomach. Saving the ship had cost us something. We'd sealed away a ghost, but its chill lingered in our bones, in the quiet spaces between breaths. The silence in the module was no longer empty. It was fragile, strained, as if the air itself remembered the scream. My hands trembled as I unlatched the neural interface, the metal clasps clicking open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. Across from me, Elias did the same, his movements stiff, deliberate. His gaze met mine, and the look in his eyes, haunted, weary, yet intensely present, mirrored everything I felt. "That wasn't in the training module," he said, his voice rough, scraped raw by the effort. "No," I agreed, my own voice a thin, frayed thread. "No, it wasn't." We sat for a long moment, just breathing, just being separate again. The phantom sensations were fading, but the memory of his fear, his courage, was stamped deep into me. I could still feel the echo of his heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that had become my own. I could still taste the cold. He unbuckled his restraints and stood, his legs unsteady. He took a step toward me, then another, each movement careful, as if testing the reality of the floor beneath his feet. When he reached my chair, he didn't speak. He just knelt, his hands coming to rest on the armrests, framing me. His eyes searched my face, tracing the lines of exhaustion, the shadow of what we'd survived. "You're shaking," he said softly. "So are you." He nodded, a slow, tired acknowledgement. Then his hand lifted not to touch my face, but to hover just above my cheek, as if feeling for the warmth there, confirming I was real, solid. "It's over, Lyra. We're here." His words were an anchor, the same steady truth he'd thrown me in the storm. I leaned into the nearness of his hand, not touching yet, just sharing the space, the heat of him chasing the last of the phantom cold from my skin. "I can still feel it," I whispered, "like frost on the inside." "I know." His voice was low, intimate. "But it's just a memory now. We put it away." He finally let his fingers brush my cheek, a tentative grounding touch. The contact was electric, a shock of warmth that cut through the lingering dread. I reached up, my own hand covering his, holding it there. His skin was cool at first, then warming quickly under mine. His thumb stroked my temple, where the pain had been worst, and the gesture was so tender it made my breath catch. "We need to," I began, but the words died in my throat. What did we need? To report? To debrief? The thought felt trivial, distant. What we needed was here, in this small, quiet module. To remember we were alive. Elias seemed to understand. He didn't move. "Later," he murmured. "They can wait." His other hand came up, cupping my face fully now, and he leaned in until his forehead rested against mine. We stayed like that, breathing together again, but this time it wasn't the ragged sink of shared labor. It was slower, deeper, a deliberate resinking. His breath warmed my lips. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his skin, the sweat of effort, the lingering ozone from the console. Real things, human things. "I felt you," he said, his voice a low vibration between us. "When you built that wall, I felt you pulling from my memories, from my self. I needed you," I admitted, the truth stark and simple. "All of you." His eyes closed for a moment, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. You had me. Then his mouth was on mine, not hesitant, not questioning, but certain. It was a kiss that tasted of relief and desperation, a claiming of the present, a defiance of the dark we just faced. His lips were firm, insistent, and I met them with equal force, my fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. He broke the kiss only to murmur against my mouth, "I need to feel you, not a phantom. You." His hands were at the fastenings of my flight suit, his fingers fumbling slightly with the clasps, but steadying as the fabric parted. I did the same for him, my own hands more sure than I felt, pushing the dark blue fabric from his shoulders, baring the skin beneath. There was a faint sheen of sweat on his chest, the muscles taut and corded from tension. I pressed my palm flat over his heart, feeling the strong, steady beat. Real, alive. He lifted me from the chair, his arms wrapping around me, and carried me the few steps to the padded floor mat we used for stretching between shifts. He laid me down with a gentleness that belied the raw energy coursing through him, then followed me down, his body covering mine, a warm, solid weight that banished the last of the cold. There was no rush, despite the urgency. Every touch was a reconfirmation. His mouth traced the line of my jaw, my throat, the hollow of my collarbone. His hands mapped my skin as if memorizing it, erasing the ghostly echoes with each stroke. I arched into him, my own hands roaming his back, his shoulders, relearning the shape of him, the reality of him. Elias. I breathed his name like a prayer, a ward against the dark. He looked down at me, his eyes dark with a need that went far beyond the physical. "I've got you, Lyra. I'm here." And he was everywhere. His body, his breath, his quiet, ragged words filled the space around us, inside us. When he finally entered me, it was with a slow, deliberate thrust that felt less like joining and more like returning. We moved together in a rhythm that was ours alone, a counterpoint to the frantic, terrified beat of before. This was slow, deep, a claiming of life from the jaws of the void. The ache in my muscles melted into a different kind of heat, a pooling warmth that spread from my core outward. He buried his face in my neck, his breath hot against my skin, his hips rolling in a steady, consuming rhythm. I wrapped my legs around him, holding him fast, anchoring myself to the feel of him, to the sweat-slicked slide of skin on skin, to the quiet, guttural sounds he made low in his throat. It built slowly, this new cascade, a wave of sensation that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the fierce, defiant joy of being alive. When it crested, it was silent, a shared, breathless suspension before it broke over us in a shuddering, consuming release. He collapsed against me, his full weight a comfort, his heart hammering a triumphant, living rhythm against my chest. We lay tangled together for a long time after, the hum of the Astraeus the only sound. The cold was gone, the ghost was silent, there was only this, the rise and fall of his chest against mine, the salt taste of his skin on my lips, the solid, unshakable truth of his body wrapped around mine. He shifted finally, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at me. He brushed a damp strand of hair from my forehead, his touch lingering. "Okay," he asked, his voice rough with spent emotion. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. More than okay. We had saved the ship, but here, in the quiet aftermath, we had saved each other. His thumb traced the line of my eyebrow, then my cheekbone, as if committing the moment to memory. The ship's gentle hum was the only sound between us now, a steady reminder of the world beyond this module, but neither of us moved to rejoin it. Not yet. "I never want to forget this," Elias said quietly, his gaze holding mine. "Not the terror, but this. The part that came after." I reached up, my fingers brushing against the stubble along his jaw. "We won't? We'll carry it with us, the good and the bad." He leaned down and kissed me again, softer this time, a slow exploration that felt like a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were clearer, the shadows in them not gone but softened, put into perspective by the warmth we'd built between us. "They'll be waiting for our report," I murmured, though every part of me resisted the thought of leaving this circle of warmth we'd created. "Let them wait a little longer," he said, his hand sliding down to rest on my hip. "The ship's safe. The ghost is sealed. They can manage without us for another few minutes." I smiled, a real, unforced smile that felt foreign on my lips after so many hours of tension. "Is that your professional assessment, Commander?" "It's my human one," he replied, his own smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Sometimes the most important maintenance is on the crew." We lay there a while longer, wrapped in the quiet and each other, until the chill of the deck began to seep through the mat. Reluctantly, we rose and dressed, our movements slower now, more synchronized than they'd ever been. Elias's hand found mine as we sealed our suits, his fingers lacing through my own. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady, his eyes clear. I took a breath, feeling the ship's air fill my lungs, clean, recycled, alive. "Ready." Together, we stepped out of the module and into the corridor, leaving the ghost behind us, but carrying forward the quiet certainty we'd forged in its shadow. Hand in hand, we walked toward the bridge, not just partners in duty anymore, but something more, anchors in the storm, keepers of the light.